Hello YouTube, this is Wally Garno, aka the Daily Libertarian, back with you for another video. Today I want to talk about Russian collusion. It's starting to come back into the media. It's becoming a big issue again as we get closer to election. Of course, the Democrats want to remind us of all of the ways in which Russia influenced our last election. I'm also going to segue into some other topics. I think you'll see how relevant they are as I get into them. But let's go ahead and start talking about Russian collusion. We know, of course, that Trump colluded with the Russians. Because the Russians donated to the Trump campaign a whopping total of $0.00. That's proof positive of Russian collusion, right? But not the $145,600,000 that the Russians donated to the Clinton Foundation. That's not proof of anything. We also know, of course, that Trump colluded with the Russians because Donald Trump Jr. met with a Russian lawyer that the Obama administration radically sped up the visa process for in order to allow her to come into the country to have a meeting with Donald Trump Jr. where she promised to give dirt on Hillary Clinton. Now, Donald Trump Jr. really did take that meeting. That meeting really did take place. Probably not the smartest thing that he ever did, but nothing came from it. They didn't have any dirt on Hillary Clinton, and he walked away empty-handed. In the meantime, Hillary Clinton's campaign, through an attorney, or rather through a group of attorneys, hired Fusion GPS to hire a British spy, Michael Steele, to go to Russia, meet with Russian officials, request whatever salacious stories they might be able to provide on Donald Trump, having prostitutes urinate on him in hotel rooms and things like that. Didn't care whether or not the information was true. They were paying these Russian officials for these stories, paid for by the Clinton Foundation, of course. And then he took all of these stories, these unverifiable, unvetted stories that nobody really cared whether or not they were true anyway, put them into a dossier, which he then leaked to the press, and the press ran several stories from that dossier. Once the stories from the dossier were run in the press, then the Obama administration, the FBI, utilized that information to apply for a FISA warrant. They said that the stories in the dossier, that some of them have been independently verified. The independent verification being the fact that the stories, having been leaked to the press in the dossier, were then read by the press. Nothing independent about that, but that's how it was spun. This started the spying on the Trump campaign. Now, I want you to think about this. We have spying by an incumbent president of one party on somebody who is running against his chosen successor from the other party. That's kind of a big deal. But of course, what we were told was that the Russians were colluding in the election and that Donald Trump was guilty and all these other things. And that's crazy because, $145,600,000 donated to the same side that legitimately colluded with the Russians. It actually hired people to go to Russia with the intent of colluding. And we're told that's not collusion, but somebody taking a stupid meeting in which nothing is delivered. That is collusion. I couldn't make it up if I wanted to. The next thing that I want to talk about, however, is China collusion, and I think China collusion is more important than Russian collusion. Trump, of course, started talking about taking on China on trade and on their intellectual property theft, theft of classified materials, all these kinds of things. Let's talk about that on the campaign trail. It's been something he's been drumming into us over and over and over again, something that Trump has made a central part of his campaign and of his presidency, taking on China and making them play ball fairly. What a lot of people don't know is that China also donated $0.00 to the Trump campaign, while donating well over $200 million to the Clinton Foundation. $200 million in excess of. And I'm not even getting into what they gave to Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton got millions of dollars from the Chinese intelligence service. In return, he gave them the guidance system for their nuclear missiles. It was also the guidance system for the space program, which is how it was sold, but space program, nuclear missiles, one and the same guidance system. So China got the ability to destroy the United States. Bill Clinton got several $1 billion for his campaign. But be that as it may, hundreds of millions of dollars, over $200 million to the Clinton Foundation around the time Hillary Clinton was running for president against Donald Trump. The other thing that we need to understand about China is that our media self-censors itself based upon Chinese interests. They do this because the media doesn't actually sell media. The media produces media, but the media itself is not their product. What the media does is they produce media, people watch the media, hopefully lots of people watch the media. Those who are watching the media then become an audience, and it is the audience not the media itself that our media companies sell. In other words, what they do is they sell advertising to companies that want to sell products, and the companies that want to sell products are far more interested in the number of people that are watching than in the actual media being watched. So it's audience that the media sells. It is not media. That's a critical distinction, because if the media says anything that the Chinese don't like, what the Chinese do is they cut them off from the 1.6 billion people in China who might otherwise watch those media houses. So what China says is very simple. If we don't like what you're printing, you will not have access to our market. That's 1.6 billion little eyeballs that will not be able to watch your media, and 1.6 billion people that you will not be able to claim as an audience that you can then sell to advertisers. As a consequence, our media does what China says. And it's important to understand that our media does what China says, not only because China gave over $200 million to the Clinton Foundation, which of course would have affected her beliefs in the election, but it's also important to realize that China is not taking climate change very seriously. China has access to the same research we do, the same data that we do. They're looking at it just like we are. And all of a sudden, we have Democrats now talking about spending tens of trillions of dollars a year, ridiculous sums of money fighting climate change, literally flushing our economy right down the toilet in order to fight climate change. If Elizabeth Warren wins, for example, her program would cost us roughly half our GDP. We would make energy prohibitively expensive. We would have to retrofit buildings. It's going to cost tons of thousands of dollars a month to heat your house in the winter. Crazy, crazy, crazy levels of spending, and that's not even including what she's going to have government spend directly. She's going to have government spend $1 trillion directly through taxes, increased taxes, and then she's going to spend $3 trillion that she's not going to tax for. So increased deficit spending, in addition to making us all pay through the nose just to live. You have people wanting to ban meat, you have people wanting to ban agriculture. It's absolutely ridiculous the levels that Democrats want to go right now to stop climate change. What's China doing? China is building what are essentially floating aircraft carriers in the South China Sea. China is also fighting an information war and an economic war against the United States of America. They have every intent of winning that war. In 2015, the China War College wrote a report in which they said that there are three kinds of warfare. You have economic warfare, you have information warfare, and you have kinetic warfare. They said 1/3 of all world trade goes through the South China Sea. So they said that what China has to do militarily is seize the South China Sea, seize control of the South China Sea. That means denying freedom of the seas. It means confronting the United States directly, and it means building Chinese power economically and in the future militarily. They said kinetic war is not possible with the United States, so they took that off the table, at least for the time being. They said, if we can ever win a war against the United States with bombs, missiles, and guns, maybe we'll do that. But for now, it's all about economics and information. One piece of information, of course, being the press, that it voluntarily censors itself based on the interests of the Chinese government. So we look at what China is doing in terms of climate change. And what they're doing is preparing their economy to grow very, very rapidly as our economy shrinks due to us fighting climate change. As energy becomes prohibitively expensive in the United States, whatever manufacturing we have left, really any employment utilizes energy in some form. Even my house here, I have to have the lights on. So we're using energy just for any form of employment. And China is looking at it and saying, if we're going to have our economy, that means somebody's economy is going to double. They're betting on it being them, particularly since Europe also is all in on climate change. You have essentially the Western powers committing economic suicide, and China preparing to pick up the slack. What is China going to do with that slack? Well, they're going to become the global superpower. At least that's what they would like to have happen. They want us to kind of, the viewpoint, I guess, has been in the United States that China is an emerging power and we are a declining power. We need to accept our role of decline and just kind of guide China in a good direction so that when they take over the world, they can be as good of stewards as we have been. The problem is that decline is a choice. We don't have to decline. If you read Will Durant would say that decline is inevitable for any civilization. All civilizations become softer, weaker, and more corrupt the longer they are in power. And there's always somebody hungrier, as Durant put it, still in the bush, ready to emerge and destroy the civilization that is dominant. When they destroy that civilization, they become a civilization, a stronger civilization. They begin to become decadent themselves. So it's cyclical. One civilization emerges as the predominant civilization and eventually gets destroyed by another, which then becomes the dominant civilization, becomes decadent, gets destroyed by another, and so on and so on and so on. The thing to remember, though, is that decline is a choice. Our civilization undoubtedly will at some point decline. It will at some point fall apart. It will at some point be taken over by another. But it doesn't have to be today. It doesn't have to be any specific day. It doesn't have to be this decade. It doesn't have to be this millennia. We can choose to be strong. To be strong, all we have to do is hold on to our values. That also means holding on to our economy. It means recognizing that China is in an information and economic war with the United States. The economic side of it, I don't think they can win. Frankly, I think a trade war, eventually the United States wins. If Trump is reelected, China has no choice but to come to the negotiating table because, the problems we're going to have from the trade war are temporary. It may last 10 years as companies move from China to other places like Taiwan or Vietnam or Burma or whatever. But as those companies, those manufacturing plants move out of China, they're gone. So for us, the problem is temporary. For China, a redistribution of the world's economic power would be permanent. We have the market right now, so you can't separate us from Chinese manufacturing. But China doesn't have to be the manufacturing base. We can be the market for other countries. So if we hold on to this, we eventually win. We can force China to stop censoring our media. We can force our media. We could, if we wanted to, legislate that our media not allow China to censor them. I don't know why we don't do that, but we could. The point is that China can't win this war unless we allow them to, and that's why it's very, very important that China continue. For China, it's very important they continue to control our media, continue to tell us how terrible climate change is going to be, continue to spread alarmism, and continue to talk about Russian collusion rather than Chinese collusion. If more people knew about what China was doing, it would be much harder for China to do those things. So, the trick is to get the word out. Speaking of getting the word out, if you like this video, if you think it's an important message, I would ask you to share it. Go ahead and put it up on Facebook, put it up on Twitter, put it up on Instagram, whatever social media platforms you use. Please put the video out there. Let people know about The Daily Libertarian, thedailylibertarian.com. You can also support me on Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/WGARNEA. And I will have a link below. I also have an article that I wrote, which is along these lines. I'll put a link to that below as well. But for now, have a nice day, Facebook. Go Blue. We're playing Army today, and hopefully a big Michigan win. Goodbye, Facebook.